He'd built an empire on arrogance and deception, believing he was untouchable. But when justice came knocking, no wealth could save him. Witness the rise, the fraud, and the shocking downfall of a man who lost everything. The courtroom buzzed like a nest of restless hornets, tension thick in the air. Every seat was filled, bodies pressed together, eyes darting toward the defendant's table. Whispers spread like wildfire, each one more scandalous than the last. Then he walked in, tall, broad-shouldered, draped in a charcoal gray designer suit. He moved with a confidence that teetered on arrogance. His slick-back hair gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights, and as his gaze swept the room, he smirked like a man arriving at a gala, not a courtroom. Nathan Calloway. A name plastered across every headline for weeks. A man accused of stealing millions from hardworking families. And yet, as he took his seat, he looked more like a guest of honor than a criminal facing justice. But it wasn't his entrance that left the crowd stunned. It was what happened next. The moment Judge Rebecca Hayes stepped into the room, the chatter died instantly. Dressed in her black robe, she moved with quiet authority, the kind that didn't require raised voices or glares to command respect. Her reputation spoke for itself. A no-nonsense judge who valued justice above all else. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Rebecca Hayes," the bailiff announced. Chairs scraped, feet shuffled, everyone stood, everyone. Except Nathan Calloway. The silence was deafening. All eyes locked onto him as he casually flipped through a legal pad, utterly unbothered. As if this entire proceeding was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, his lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently. Nathan didn't even glance up, just waved him off with an effortless flick of his wrist. Judge Hayes reached her bench and stopped. The weight of her gaze fell on him, unwavering, unreadable. She said nothing. She didn't have to. The silence stretched, growing heavier with each passing second. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Who the hell did this guy think he was? But Nathan didn't flinch. His expression was smug, almost daring the judge to react. "You may be seated," Judge Rebecca Hayes said, her voice calm but firm. She didn't acknowledge the slight "not yet." But the energy in the room shifted. The tension wasn't just thick anymore. It was suffocating. And this was only the beginning. Nathan Calloway was about to learn the hard way no amount of wealth or entitlement could place him above the law. He wasn't just another rich man. He was the kind of rich that made headlines. Luxury yachts, multi-million-dollar mansions on both coasts, private jets, exclusive parties that put A-list celebrities to shame. His company, Calloway Investments, had been hailed as a financial empire, a golden ticket for anyone looking to secure their future. But beneath the glitz and glamour was something far more sinister. Calloway's rise to power had been built on deception, on selling dreams that were nothing more than illusions. He had convinced hardworking families, small business owners, and retirees to pour their life savings into fraudulent schemes. Retirement accounts, college funds, entire family inheritances gone in the blink of an eye. The fallout was catastrophic. Families lost their homes. Parents struggled to put food on the table. Elderly couples faced the terrifying reality of spending their final years in poverty. The ripple effect of his greed spread far and wide. But to Nathan Calloway, it was just business. Even when investigators finally caught up to him, the evidence stacked against him: bank records, falsified documents, former employees willing to testify. He still believed he was untouchable. Smug as ever, he shrugged off the accusations. "I've got the best lawyer's money can buy," he had told reporters outside his sprawling Malibu mansion. "This will blow over. It always does." And for a while, it seemed like he might be right. His legal team worked tirelessly, filing motion after motion, dragging the case out for months. They painted him as a visionary, a misunderstood entrepreneur, a scapegoat for the failures of others. But no amount of legal maneuvering could erase the mountain of evidence or the devastation left in his wake. By the time the trial finally began in Los Angeles, the courtroom was packed. Every single day, people came seeking justice or at least some semblance of it. Among them was Angela Ramirez, a widowed mother of 3 who had lost everything after trusting Callaway Investments. Her youngest daughter had to drop out of college. The home they had built together, gone. Sitting beside her was Peter Vaughn, a retired firefighter who had spent decades saving for his future, only to end up sleeping in his brother's spare room. Their stories and countless others were laid bare in gut-wrenching detail. Angela's voice cracked as she recounted the day she realized she couldn't make her mortgage payment. "I begged them not to take my home," she said, tears slipping down her face. "But they didn't care. My kids had to sleep in our car for 2 weeks. Do you know what that feels like?" Peter's testimony was just as devastating. "I spent 35 years running into burning buildings," he said, his voice thick with anger. "And this man, he burned my future to the ground without a second thought." But through it all, Nathan Callaway sat there, unfazed. He leaned back in his chair, scrolling on his phone, occasionally whispering jokes to his attorney, completely detached from the wreckage he had caused. To him, these were just stories. Irrelevant noise. None of it mattered. He believed the outcome was already in his favor. The press devoured it. Headlines screamed about his arrogance, his complete lack of remorse, his blatant disregard for the very people whose lives he had destroyed. And still Nathan Callaway smirked, because in his mind, the game was already won. He had put on a show for the court. Public opinion was turning against him. Headlines painted him as a villain. Social media was flooded with outrage. But Nathan Callaway didn't care. As far as he was concerned, public opinion didn't write checks. His lawyer did his best to control the narrative. "Mr. Callaway deeply regrets any hardship caused," the attorney said during a press conference, standing in front of a swarm of reporters. "But he remains confident that the truth will prevail." The truth, however, was that Nathan had no intention of admitting guilt. He was betting on the system bending in his favor, just like it always had before. But this time, he had miscalculated. There was one factor he hadn't accounted for. Judge Rebecca Hayes wasn't like the people he was used to dealing with. The trial became a spectacle. News vans lined the streets outside the courthouse, cameras flashing, reporters elbowing for position. Inside, the tension only thickened as the days dragged on. One by one, witnesses took the stand. Each testimony hammered another nail into Nathan Callaway's metaphorical coffin. But it wasn't just the evidence that left the courtroom in shock. It was Nathan's behavior. On the 3rd day of the trial, the prosecution unveiled their most damning proof, yet a series of internal emails where Nathan had explicitly instructed his team to falsify records and mislead investors. The room fell into stunned silence as the prosecutor read his own words aloud. "Make the numbers look good. We need these suckers to sign on the dotted line." The words hung in the air, like poison. Angela Ramirez, seated in the front row, shook her head in disbelief. Peter Vaughn clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. And Nathan? He smirked. The prosecutor turned toward him, her voice sharp. "Mr. Callaway, do you recognize this email?" Before Nathan could answer, his lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. This question has been asked and answered in pre-trial hearings." Judge Hayes raised a hand, her expression unreadable. "Overruled. The defendant will answer the question." Nathan leaned into the microphone, his voice dripping with condescension. "Yeah, I recognize it. But let's not pretend it means what you're implying. It's just business talk you wouldn't understand." The crowd erupted in whispers. And then bang. Judge Hayes's gavel struck like a thunderclap. Order in the court. Her voice sliced through the noise like a knife. She turned her piercing gaze back to Nathan Callaway. "Mr. Callaway, I advise you to watch your tone. This is not a boardroom meeting." Judge Rebecca Hayes's voice was steady, controlled. But the warning was clear. Yet Nathan Calloway didn't flinch. If anything, he looked amused. Like this was all just an elaborate game. And as the trial continued, his arrogance only grew. He scoffed at witness testimonies, chuckled sarcastically during cross-examinations, whispered loudly to his lawyer at key moments. The audience watched in disbelief as he treated the courtroom like his own personal stage. Then came the day Angela Ramirez took the stand. She stepped forward, clutching a folded piece of paper in trembling hands. Her voice wavered at first, but every word carried the weight of her pain. "I trusted him," she said, staring straight at Nathan. "I trusted him with everything I had, and he destroyed my family's future." Nathan didn't even acknowledge her. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, casually scrolling through his phone. The prosecutor's voice cut through the room. "Your Honor, the defendant is clearly not paying attention to the witness." All eyes turned to Judge Hayes. Her face remained impassive, but her eyes burned with quiet fury. "Mr. Calloway," she said, her voice measured. "Put your phone away, now." Nathan barely glanced up. Unfazed, he held up the device as if to prove a point. "I was just checking something important," he said. Judge Hayes' tone sharpened. "I said now." For a second, it seemed like he might argue. But then, reluctantly, he set the phone down. The tension in the room was suffocating. Angela continued her testimony, but her voice carried a tremor of disbelief, like she couldn't comprehend the sheer lack of basic human decency. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Except for Nathan's, a week later, the prosecution rested its case. Now, it was the defense's turn. Nathan's lawyer pulled out every trick in the book discrediting witnesses, twisting the narrative, even painting Nathan as a victim of overzealous prosecutors. But the cracks were too deep to cover. Through it all, Judge Hayes remained composed. She rarely spoke, but when she did, the weight of her words was impossible to ignore. Her presence loomed over the room like an unshakable force. Judge Rebecca Hayes never raised her voice, never lost control. But anyone watching could see it. Her patience with Nathan Calloway's antics was wearing dangerously thin. The trial had reached its final day. The air inside the courtroom was electric, thick with anticipation. Every seat was filled, reporters crammed into the back rows, pens poised, cameras ready. The gallery was packed with victims, their faces a raw mix of anger and hope. All eyes were on Judge Hayes as she prepared to deliver the sentence. At the defense table, Nathan Calloway lounged in his chair, his posture as relaxed as ever. He even had the audacity to flash a small grin at the cameras, soaking in the attention. He didn't look like a man about to face judgment. He looked like a man convinced he had already won. Then Judge Hayes spoke. The room fell deathly silent. "Mr. Calloway," she began, her voice steady and deliberate, "you have been found guilty on all counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice." Her words cut through the room like a blade. "The evidence against you is overwhelming. The testimonies of your victims paint a devastating picture of your actions. You manipulated, exploited, and destroyed the lives of countless people, all for personal gain." Nathan leaned back, his expression unreadable. But Judge Hayes wasn't done. "Throughout this trial, you have shown a blatant lack of remorse. Your behavior in this courtroom has been nothing short of disgraceful. You have insulted your victims, disregarded this court's authority, and treated these proceedings as if they were beneath you." A murmur rippled through the gallery, quiet but unmistakable. In the front row, Angela Ramirez clasped her hands tightly, her knuckles white. Judge Hayes' tone shifted, turning cold. "Justice. Mr. Calloway, this is not about wealth, power, or privilege. This is about accountability. And today, you will face the consequences of your actions." The courtroom was so silent. You could hear the faint rustling of paper. For the first time, Nathan Calloway's smirk faltered. He straightened in his chair, his confidence wavering. Judge Rebecca Hayes didn't pause. "Therefore," she declared, her voice unwavering, "I sentence you to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole." The room erupted. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Nathan's face went pale, the blood draining from his cheeks. 25 years. He had expected a slap on the wrist, maybe a few months in a cushy white-collar facility. Not this. This was unheard of, for someone like him. And Judge Hayes wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am ordering the immediate liquidation of your assets to repay the victims of your crimes. Every dollar you stole will be returned to the families you devastated." A stunned murmur swept through the room. In the front row, Angela Ramirez pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Peter Vaughn leaned back in his seat, eyes wide with disbelief. Nathan shot up from his chair, his face burning red with anger. "You can't do this," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the walls. "I'm Nathan Calloway. You can't treat me like some common criminal." Bang! Judge Hayes's gavel slammed down, her expression unmoved. "Mr. Calloway, sit down." But Nathan wasn't done. "This is a joke. I'll appeal this. I'll have your career ruined, Judge." The bailiffs moved in, ready to restrain him. Judge Hayes didn't flinch. Her voice sliced through the chaos like a knife. "This is my courtroom, Mr. Calloway, and you will show respect." "Bailiffs, escort the defendant out." Nathan fought against their grip, his protests ringing through the hall. But it was over. As he was dragged away, the weight of his downfall finally began to sink in. Nathan Calloway's protests faded with every step as the bailiffs dragged him away. Then, something rare happened. The courtroom erupted in applause, something that almost never happened in a place like this. But today, it felt entirely appropriate. Judge Rebecca Hayes let the moment settle before turning to the audience, her expression softening just slightly. "Justice has been served," she said. "Let this be a reminder that no one, no matter how powerful, is above the law." Outside, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions. The crowd spilled into the streets, but as the courtroom emptied, one lingering question hung in the air. Would this sentence truly change a man like Nathan Calloway? Inside, the excitement still buzzed. But for those directly affected by his crimes, the emotions were more complicated. Standing on the courthouse steps, Angela Ramirez clutched her purse tightly as a reporter approached with a microphone. "How do you feel after today's verdict?" Angela hesitated. Then, with a steady breath, she said, "I feel relieved. But the truth is, no sentence will erase the damage he caused. My kids and I are still rebuilding. But at least now we have hope." Nearby, Peter Vaughn spoke with a friend. "It's not just about the years he's getting," he said, shaking his head. "It's about the message. People like him think they're untouchable. Today proves they're not." Upstairs, inside her chambers, Judge Hayes sat quietly, staring out the window at the commotion below. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel victory. Just a steady resolve. Her role had never been about personal satisfaction. It was about ensuring fairness, about reminding the world that justice can balance the scales, even against the weight of wealth and privilege. Nathan Calloway's name would dominate the headlines for weeks, but for the people he had wronged, their chapter was finally closing. The financial restitution would help many of them start over, but the scars? The scars would take much longer to heal. But the wounds he left behind, those would take much longer to heal. In the weeks that followed, Nathan Calloway's trial became more than just another courtroom spectacle. It sparked a national conversation. It became a rallying cry for accountability, for holding the powerful to the same standards as everyone else. People across the country began sharing their own stories of injustice, drawing strength from the verdict. But perhaps the most powerful moment came from Angela Ramirez's youngest daughter. Sophie, She wrote a letter to Judge Rebecca Hayes, later published in a local newspaper. "Thank you for standing up for my family," it read. "Thank you for showing us that people like Nathan Calloway can't get away with hurting people like us. You didn't just give us justice, you gave us a second chance." The trial of Nathan Calloway wasn't just another courtroom battle. It was a wake-up call, a testament to the resilience of everyday people, a reminder that integrity still matters, and proof that justice isn't just a distant ideal, it's something worth fighting for. So now, as this story lingers in your mind, ask yourself, what does accountability truly mean? And in your own life, how can you ensure that fairness and justice aren't just words, but actions? Because in the end, justice isn't just the responsibility of the courts. It's a fight we all have a part in every single day.